Welcome, everyone. This is Brother Doug with the Waking by Yahuwah Assembly. I'm with my sister Shoshana, my sister Sadie, my brother Dennis, and our sister Sally. We're going to be doing a study today called The Origins of Xmas / Saturnalia Exposed. First, we're going to be going to the scriptures to see what Yahuwah himself says. Remember that it's not what it means to us, and it's actually what it means to the Father and the Son, to Yahuwah and Yahusha. So before I even start reading Jeremiah 10, verse 1, notice that it says, O house of Yashraal. Any believer in Yahusha Messiah, that is you. Okay, you are grafted in. You are not a separate entity, which is the Christian church. Okay, you have been grafted into Yahuwah's original people, which means this includes you. When it says house of Yashraal, every time you see that in the Old Testament, that's talking about all believers in Yahusha Messiah. So I just wanted to put that out there. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1. Hear the word that Yahuwah speaks to you, or in the King James would say, thus says Yahuwah. This is Yahuwah's own words through the prophet Jeremiah. O house of Yashrael, thus says Yahuwah, learn not the way of the nations, the heathen, the Gentiles, nor be dismayed at the signs of the heavens, because the nations are dismayed at them. Basically, the nations are in awe of the signs of the heavens. They worship them. They idolize them. They worship the sun, the moon, and the stars. That's what the pagans do. Okay, so that's what he's saying here. And notice how he says, before he's about to even say anything else, he starts off by saying, do not learn the ways of the nations. So whatever that comes after this is a way of the pagans, is a way of the nations. For the customs of the peoples are vanity. A tree from the forest is cut down. Vanity, basically worthless, wastefulness, means nothing. A tree from the forest is cut down and worked with an axe by the hands of a craftsman. They decorated with silver and gold. They fastened it with hammers and nails so that it cannot move. Okay, now if we just stop there, what does that really get you? Okay, if you really look at those four verses, and you're going to honestly tell me that does not remind you of a Christmas tree? Okay, they decorated it with silver and gold. They cut it out of the forest. They fasten it so it does not move. Okay, what do you do with a Christmas tree when you cut it from the forest? You fasten it to the ground in your home so it does not move. Okay, so this is obviously Yahuwah's condemning the practice of having a Christmas tree in your home. Also, we have a second witness of this in the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to get a very verbatim commandment in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Please, sorry, my voice is breaking up a little bit for some reason. All right. All right, so Deuteronomy 16, verse 21 says, you shall not, and I'm actually going to use the Septuagint version because I really like the way it's worded here. You shall not plant for yourself a grove. You shall not plant for yourself any tree near the altar of your Elohim. You shall not set up for yourself a pillar which Yahuwah your Elohim hates. So very next verse he starts talking about pillars. But in verse 21, he clearly says, do not set up a tree near the altar of your Elohim. What does the Christian church do every year for Nimrodmas, for Xmas, for Saturnalia? They put a Christmas tree right on the altar, like right next to the podium. So right there, that's actually transgressing Deuteronomy 16:21. And I don't know if anyone wants to comment or make any comments or anything. So I just had certain people muted just in case for sound purposes. So I'm not breaking up. All right, so here we go. So the next one would also be, we're going to stay in the book of Deuteronomy, actually, and we're going to go, does Yahuwah actually say to us that we're not to worship him the way the nations worship their deities, or are we allowed to use pagan customs and Christianize it, as many people say? So we're about to find that out right now. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1, and we're going to go all the way down to 4. Okay, so here we go. And I think actually I'm going to switch my app here and actually go to the YouVersion Bible app that I have on my desktop because I like the fact that they have the NLT on here. The NLT really makes this simple to understand what he's referring to in context here. So Deuteronomy chapter 12, 1-4 here. Now, let me just make sure my screen share is sharing my sound and everything. All right. Okay. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 1-4. Yahuwah's chosen place for worship. That is the basically name of this chapter. These are the decrees and regulations you must be careful to obey when you live in the land that Yahuwah, the Elohim of your ancestors, is giving you. You must obey them as long as you live. When you drive out the nations that live there, you must destroy all the places where they worship their mighty ones. High on the mountains, up on the hills, under every green tree. Okay, notice how he makes a very distinction about they worship their mighty ones under green trees. That's something to make a note of. Verse 3, break down their altars and smash their sacred pillars. Burn their Asherah poles, which would be, steeples in modern day where you see churches, with the top of the churches kind of looking like a witch's hat. That would be considered like an Asherah pole. And cut down their carved idols or their graven images. Completely erase the name of their mighty ones. I like how the NLT puts an exclamation point after that. Do not worship Yahuwah your Elohim in the way these pagan peoples worship their mighty ones. That seems like a direct commandment not to do what is done on Christmas. I don't know. That's just me. Rather, you must seek Yahuwah your Elohim at the place of worship he himself will choose from among all the tribes. Now, just for context purposes, this is referring to when his tabernacle was put in the wilderness, and then they got to the land of Canaan, and they brought the tabernacle there, and eventually King Solomon built a temple for Yahuwah. That's what he means by a place where Yahuwah chooses himself to dwell at, basically. And I think we'll stop there because that's pretty much the context I wanted to get to with this chapter. So that was Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 1 all the way to 5. So basically, don't worship Yahuwah the way the pagans worship their deities. You are to worship Yahuwah where he wants you to worship him, the place that he wants you to worship him. For now, since there's no temple, we are a type of temple for Yahuwah to dwell in. So right now, we don't have a place to worship him, but that will come in the millennium. I truly believe so. That will be a literal commandment that we can keep, that I believe there will be a true temple when Yahushua comes back. As it says in Zechariah, the Messiah would build the house of Yahuwah in the millennium. So that's just my opinion. But anyway, the reason I brought up Deuteronomy chapter 12, 1-4 is that Yahuwah clearly says, do not worship me the way the pagans worship their deities. And we're supposed to be, we're supposed to be destroying the names of the false mighty ones, which is interesting. I wonder what the context of that is, of, I guess, destroying anywhere where the names are or what have it. Also, we have to keep the context, though, of that was when they were entering the land of Canaan. We're not in the land that Yahuwah has given us yet. So that's something we should keep in mind. But I also have a couple other verses here in the same chapter. If we go all the way down to verses 29 all the way down to 31, you'll get even like a reiteration of him telling us not to do this. So we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 29 all the way down here. Let me see here. Go here. Come on, where's 29? Oh, whoops. That's the only thing I don't like about this. Please bear with me, guys. This stupid thing sometimes messes up. Let's see here. Why did it do that? All right, so it skips ahead. Oh, I see what it's doing. All right, sorry. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 12, 16, 17, 18. All right, whatever. For some reason, it won't allow me to skip ahead to the next few verses. Okay. Whoa. What are you doing? Stupid thing. All right. So Deuteronomy 12, verses 29 to 31. I'll do it on my MySword because the YouVersion Bible app's acting a little stupid right now. All right. And if Yahuwah your Elohim shall utterly destroy the nations to whom you go in there to inherit their land from before you, and you shall inherit it and dwell in their land. Take heed to yourself that you seek not to follow them after they are destroyed before you, saying, how do these nations act towards their mighty ones? I will do likewise. You shall not do so to Yahuwah your Elohim, for they have sacrificed to their mighty ones the abominations of Yahuwah which he hates, basically the abominations that Yahuwah cannot stand. He loathes these abominations. For they burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their mighty ones. Okay? Now, obviously, in modern day, no believer outright would ever do that to their son or daughter, literally. But something I want to bring up is that it's really kind of a side topic, but abortion, to Yahuwah, abortion is just as bad. And to him, it's kind of the same thing as, burning your son or daughter to Molech. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. So for those that support abortion, you really want to take this verse in context I just read, and really, you should be pro-life. You shouldn't be telling people it's okay to have abortion. So that's something we need to be very, very careful of, not to endorse something like that. Because to Yahuwah, burning their son and daughter in the fire to Molech, is pretty much equated with modern day abortion. It's pretty much the same thing. So it's just as bad. So that's what I wanted to point out there. And again, in the context of entering into the land Yahuwah shall give you, I think this will be fulfilled in the millennium. We really can't do some of this stuff right now, but what we can do is not worship Yahuwah the way the nations worship their mighty ones. I think that's the theme I see here. So I think that we can obviously take into context and keep that part of his law for right now until he gives us our own land when he returns. So I also wanted to go to Exodus chapter 20. This is like very, very key here to understand. This is like the basis of not committing idolatry, and that we need to be very careful. So it says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, it says, you shall have no other mighty ones besides me. You shall not make to yourself a graven image, a idol, nor the likeness of anything, whatever things are in heaven above, whatever things are in the earth beneath, and whatever are in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I am Yahuwah your Elohim, a jealous Elohim, repaying the lawlessnesses of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation, to them that hate me, and bestowing mercy upon them that love me, to thousands of them, and on them that keep my commandments. So for those that keep his commandments, he's showing mercy to. For those that don't love him, that hate him and disobey him, and are worshiping other mighty ones, making images to serve and bow down to, which, by the way, when you bow down before a Christmas tree, that is an act of worship. When you bow down to get gifts for your children, you might not see it that way, but that's how Yahuwah sees it. You're bowing down to something that is a physical, inanimate object. You're bowing before it. So to him, that's idolatry. That in his definition in Scripture, that is idolatry. So that's something I wanted to point out, and you should all honestly, wholeheartedly think about it the next time before you start celebrating Christmas. Also, there's a very interesting verse from the NLT that I want to go back to here in the book of Saturnalia, interestingly enough. And it's very interesting how the NLT is the only one that makes sense the way they translate chapter 1, verses 7 to 8. And actually, no, it's verses 8 to 9. My bad about that. It's Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 8 to 9. And I'm going to put it on share screen here so you guys can see there's like a big difference with the way, let's see here. See here. So it says in Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 8 to 9, in the NLT, it says, on that day of judgment, says Yahuwah, or that day of right ruling, I will punish the leaders and princes of Yehuda and all those following pagan customs. Yes, I will punish those who participate in pagan worship ceremonies. This is the only translation that translates it like that. Other ones will say clad garments or weird garments. It's very weird how the other translations put it, but I think the NLT gets the context of it. The translator got the context, because if you read from the beginning of the chapter, it's talking about Molech worship. It's talking about Baal worship and all that. So the NLT knew in context what this verse was referring to. So they kind of paraphrased it. They're a paraphrase translation. So I think they got it right in that particular verse. So basically, this is a warning from Yahuwah to us. He will destroy those celebrating pagan customs and keeping them. And actually, now I want to go to a warning by Paul, actually, in the New Testament. Believe it or not, he actually warns against such ceremonies. It's actually in the book of Galatians, which people like to quote from, which is funny enough. People don't realize what he's referring to in Galatians chapter 4, verses 10 to 11 here. Galatians chapter 4, verses 10 to 11 says, you observe days and months and times and years. I'm afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. Basically, he's saying, I'm afraid that I have worked for you, meaning bringing the Besorah to you in vain, because you observe certain days, months, and times and years. Now, think about this for a second, because Christians like to use this meaning the feast of Yahuwah. Why would he say that, referring to Yahuwah's feast, but yet tell his followers to keep the Passover? Think about that. So let's keep in context all of Paul's letters here. Okay, so obviously he's not talking about Yahuwah's feast in this context. He's talking about days, seasons, times, and years of the pagans, of the Galatians. If you research who the Galatians were, they were Gentiles. They were Gentile converts. So that's something you might want to think about too, is the historical context of the book of Galatians. Also, there's another one that's pretty big, pretty decent proof scripturally here too. Paul again says this in Colossians, the book of Colossians, chapter 2, verse 8. And it says right here, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men, after the rudiments of the world, basically the ways of the world, and not after the Messiah. Now think about that for a second. Is Christmas found in Scripture, or as a celebration of Yahuwah's, feast, or is it a tradition of man? Because if it's a tradition of man, then it qualifies what Paul says. He's warning you not to be spoiled by vain philosophy and deceit of men that make you follow these traditions of men instead of the ways of Messiah. Just to paraphrase. So I believe that's what Paul's talking about in Colossians chapter 2, verse 8. And Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 all the way down to 11 even warn us of keeping such ceremonies and, times, days, and years. So let's see here. Where's the next one I want to go to? Now, the next couple of verses here are going to be mainly focused on how bending before a Christmas tree in Yahuwah's eyes is actually adultery, even spiritual adultery, along with idolatry. So I got a couple of verses here that deal with where the phrase is spoken of under every green tree in connection to idolatry and adultery in Yahuwah's eyes. We're going to first go to the book of 1 Kings. Shoshana, I see you might want to say something. Go ahead if you want to unmute yourself. Because I was trying to unmute you before, but I couldn't.
Actually, I wasn't going to say anything right now.
Oh, okay.
I had something to say earlier, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was trying to unmute you before. For some reason, it wasn't allowing me. Let's see here. So 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 23 says, "For they also built them high places and images and groves on every high hill and under every green tree." So this is basically the pillars Yahuwah talks about to destroy. Instead of destroying them, they're rebuilding them. They're actually putting them on every high hill. So basically the high hill would be where the high places are. You see all over the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and where these pagans would do, they also known as the pagan priests, the black priests, which modern day became the Black Pope, is probably where we get the phrase Black Pope from, because in Scripture you got the pagan priests and the black priests they refer to in Scripture. So they're basically building graven images on every high hill under every green tree. So he's connecting that to idolatry right in 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 23. And let's see. Oh, Don, no. Don, buddy. All right. So now we got 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 4, which says, "And he sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree." Again, so they're burning sacrifice and incenses to false mighty ones. Okay? So again, that's the problem too. They were starting to worship other mighty ones and starting to do this under every green tree. So we really got to be thinking to ourselves, what does Yahuwah think about us bowing before a tree? We really should be thinking about that, because according to these couple verses so far, and I still got a bunch more, it doesn't look good. Doesn't look to Yahuwah. He's not smiling about this. So 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 10, and it says, "And they set them up images and groves in every high hill and under every green tree." Okay, so again, now that was 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 10. And something I want to explain to believers out there and atheists, maybe not, they don't know about groves. Groves are like these altars they would build for the dead almost, if I'm not mistaken. Groves are like where they would make covenants with the dead. They would worship the dead, not too far-fetched from the Catholic Church. What they do with the saints and all that, how they raise the saints' tomb up and they worship the saints on All Saints' Day. Very similar. But anyway, so let me go to the next cross-reference I have here is 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 4. It says, "He sacrificed also and burnt incense in the high places on the hills and under every green tree." Again, so, I mean, it's again and again and again we're seeing the same mistake, Yashraal, the correct term for Israel. The 12 tribes, what they kept doing and why Yahuwah was so angry with them. This was one of the main reasons they got divorced in Jeremiah chapter 3. This is one of the main reasons. They keep doing the same stuff. And Yahuwah got sick of it. He's like, all right, you want to commit adultery? Fine. And we're about to get to that part right now. We're about to get to Jeremiah chapter 2 and chapter 3 here in our cross references. Let's see here. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 20. So Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 20. "For of old time I have broken your yoke and burst your bonds, and you have said, I will not transgress. When upon every high hill and under every green tree you wander and play the harlot." Okay, so he's calling his people a harlot, a whore, for going under every green tree. If I'm a believer, I would pay attention to that type of terminology. That, to me, that he's literally saying they're committing adultery, they're being a harlot spiritually by committing idolatry, by serving other mighty ones under these green trees. See, that's what we got to understand is maybe we don't know about this because we've been ignorant of this in the Christian church, but bending before a tree is much more than just getting a present for a child. In these ancient civilizations, and we're going to get to this, how this stuff was basically connected to worshiping other deities, not even worshiping Yahuwah. So, all right, so we're getting close on time. I'm going to try to finish these last 3 cross-references. We might have to do part 2 to this study. Okay, so Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 6 says, Yahuwah said also unto me in the days of Josiah, or Yoshiyahu, the king, have you not seen that which backsliding Yashra has done? She has gone up upon every high mountain under every green tree and has played the harlot. Again, Yahuwah equating with going under every green tree as playing a harlot or a whore. So that's something we should really take into account and really be serious about, thinking about whether this pleases Yahuwah or not. Only acknowledge so now we're going to go to verse 13 down in the same chapter. Only acknowledge your lawlessness, that you have transgressed against Yahuwah thy Elohim, and have scattered thy ways to the strangers under every green tree, and you have not obeyed my voice, says Yahuwah. Now that's pretty strong to me. He's saying that if we've done similar customs to this, bowing before a tree, going under every green tree, playing the harlot, we have sinned. 1 John 3:4. What is sin? Transgression of the law. So let's, you should really be taking that into consideration. This type of custom is not honoring the Father. It's not honoring the Son. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 5. Inflaming yourselves with graven images under every green tree, slaying the children in the valleys under the clefts of the rocks. Now that is horrible. They were actually even doing worse than not just committing fornication, laying under every green tree, playing the harlot. They were actually slaughtering their own children, probably passing them through the fire, if I was to make a guess of what that was actually talking about.
Isaiah what, brother?
That was Isaiah chapter 57, verse 5. Yep. And I only have one more, and I'm going to give some time after this cross-reference for anyone who wants to add anything before we do a part 2. So I only got one more cross-reference, and I'll give you guys the floor after that. Let's see here. Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 13. Then shall you know that I am Yahuwah. So that is Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 13. Then shall you know that I am Yahuwah, when their slain men shall be among their idols, round about their altars, upon every high hill, and in all the tops of the mountains, and under every green tree, and under every thick oak, the place where they did offer sweet savor to all their idols. Wow. So yeah, this is why Yahuwah was so angry. And I know the inclination right now is you're saying, oh, well, we're not worshiping other deities under these trees. But the fact of the matter is, if we're going to get to it in part 2, when you offer gifts under the tree, that is a form of offering sweet incense or doing sacrifices to a tree. That is a form of it. That is a form of worship. Whether you realize it or not, bending before a tree, putting presents under it, and getting presents under it, bowing down again to get presents for your children, that is an act of worship to the tree, whether you realize it or not. So that's what I wanted to end with for part 1. So I'm going to let Sister Shoshana and everyone else, if they got anything to add, questions, comments, before we do a part 2. I still got a lot of other scriptures to go to, and part 2 is going to be more about archaeological finds that I've found in the past couple of days. So.
You might notice in the ancient cultures of Nimrod, where was it Nimrod or Tammuz that died and supposedly sprang up as a green tree? and they worshipped it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the interesting part, is that Satan stole the virgin birth from Yahuwah and actually made Tammuz, in a way, be a counterfeit of Yahusha. Because the story goes is that the sunrise of Nimrod, basically the story is that Semiramis, his mother/wife, Nimrod's mother/wife, would tell people that when he died, he ascended up into heaven, and that he became the sun deity, and that his sun rays caused her to be pregnant, a virgin birth, immaculate conception. So the actual real story that Yahuwah caused Miriam to be pregnant, as you can find in Matthew 1 and all through the Brit Hadashah, Satan knew that was going to be the Besorah. He knew that. He took that story, twisted it, made it all about the sun god, the sun god, and made it that the sun rays caused Semiramis to birth Tammuz, and that he became the evergreen tree, and that because the evergreen never dies, even in the winter. If you look at scientific finds, the evergreen tree never dies. That's why they use it. It's supposed to represent
from year to year.
Yeah, so basically, it's a twisting of the Besorah, really, is what it is. The story of the whole Horus, Tammuz, Nimrod story. It's really a fable that Satan knew about the true Messiah that was going to be born of a virgin, and he used that truth and twisted it to be about his Messiah. And and unfortunately, people have fallen from the belief because they watch Zeitgeist and all these stuff that talk about that Yahusha was somehow the same thing as Horus and all that, because all these religions have the virgin birth, 12 disciples, and how every other pagan religion has a similar story to Yahusha, which not realizing that Yahuwah prophesied about this way before those religions ever came about. He prophesied it in the book of Genesis, first of all. So Satan knew about this. He knew about the seed of the woman and all that. So he used that against us. He used the actual Besorah story to make people reject the Besorah. He used it in his fake religions, and you'll see it all over. So he used Nimrod as basically a pawn. He used him a way to get people to idolize him and worship him. So we'll get more into that in part 2, actual historical evidence or archaeological evidence of Saturnalia and all that. We mainly wanted to focus on the scriptural basis in this part 1 and why Yahuwah himself hates this custom. He hates it. He calls it adultery, fornication, idolatry. You know, so many verses that I read that he talks about. He connects idolatry to laying under every green tree. They were even worshiping other mighty ones under these trees. So stay tuned for part 2. We're going to do that shortly. We got a tiny bit of time before we have to stop this recording. Brother Dennis, Sister Sally, Sadie, do you guys have anything to say to them before we do the part 2?
No, I was going to mention that's where we get the old saying, tie a yellow ribbon around an oak tree. That's to honor Tammuz.
Yep. Yeah, the T, which is stylized as a cross, actually was the first letter of his name. So that's why you got cross on the hot cross buns. Those are actually cakes to the Queen of Heaven. Most people don't realize that. You can find that actually in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 7, verse 18, that they baked cakes to the Queen of Heaven, which would have been the mother of Tammuz, Semiramis. And
Satan also created a trinity.
Yep.
Which is not in. It's not supposed to be in true worship at all, but
no, that was the idea. The mother, the Gaia, the sun deity.
Yeah.
The whole idea of the Trinity is based upon sun worship, moon worship, and then the child of the sun and moon together, which you can actually even find in Freemasonry. They believe the same thing. They